Right in the heart of London, overlooking Trafalgar Square, is one of the world's most extraordinary art institutions, the National Gallery. Since opening its doors in 1838, the museum has been home to more than 2,600 artworks spanning 7 centuries, from early Renaissance to 19th century European masterpieces. Their stories and secrets colliding across rooms, teaching without words. Art isn't just for the eyes, it's for our minds, our sense of wonder, and the tender strings of our hearts. It's rare for a painter to produce a masterpiece at the very beginning of their career. Yet in 1884, a 24-year-old Georges Seurat completed Bathers at Asnières. This monumental canvas, measuring at 2 by 3 meters, was Seurat's first major composition. On the banks of the Seine River at Asnières, an industrial suburb northwest of central Paris, we see working-class men and boys. A sharp diagonal line cuts through the canvas, dividing land from water. In the distant background, we see a railway bridge and the smoking chimneys of the gas plant at Clichy, an adjacent suburb. These figures have finished their labor for the day. Their clothes are piled on the grass. Their bodies are static, almost statuesque, destined to remain in the gestures they've chosen for as long as we're willing to look at them. What's odd is how little they acknowledge one another. There are no signs of a conversation or even eye contact. They're not looking to one another nor at us for an interaction. Their faces, painted from the profile, lack distinct features. Seurat offers no further introduction because none is needed. We know who they are. They are the invisible workers who keep society functioning. Even leisure, Seurat suggests, is framed by work for our subjects. Let's look closer at the river. A small rowboat with 3 figures drifts by. The man on the right rows, as the other 2 figures, wearing a top hat and holding an umbrella, take rest. The rower wears the same straw hat as this subject in the foreground, creating a subtle visual link between members of the working class. Directly across the water, just out of the frame to the right, is the setting of Seurat's most famous work, A Sunday on La Grande Jette. In fact, the ferry boat we see here is moving between these 2 worlds. It's the same setting, sunlight and afternoon, but the people, they're different. The figures here, who are part of the middle and upper middle class, are wearing more formal attire. Though only separated by 200 meters, they occupy entirely different social realities. And this division is exactly the point Seurat was trying to make. Everyone plays a role in the same economy, yet experiences the world differently within it. You might know of Seurat for his pointillism technique, a style of painting where distinct dots of pure color are applied in patterns to form an image. But here, we witness the lead-up. Instead of dots, we see crosshatches. The painting reflects the Impressionist style through its color palette, light brushwork, play of light and shadow, and focus on modern life. However, unlike his Impressionist contemporaries who sought to capture the fleeting moment, Seurat played around with the science of color a bit more. If you look closely at the backs of our bathers, you can see that Seurat painted the water slightly lighter and the back slightly darker right at the edges. This creates a subtle halo which gives a sense of volume and 3-dimensionality without traditional academic modeling. Interestingly, the famous dots did eventually make their way into the work in Seurat's attempt to rework the canvas. In the grass, in the water, on this figure's back, and on this figure's hat. Complementary colors are placed next to each other so that upon viewing it, they mix in our eyes instead of on the palette. And like that, science folded directly into paint, and what began as Impressionism edged toward art history's next progression, Neo-Impressionism. When Seurat submitted this painting to the Paris Salon, it was rejected. But within the Parisian art circles and Seurat's contemporaries, it mattered. While it took time, the work eventually gained the acclaim it so rightfully deserved, bridging established traditions of the past and the experimental modernity that followed. The Wilton Diptych, taking its name from the house it was acquired from in 1939 by the National Gallery of Art, is perhaps the most famous surviving work of the medieval age. For being almost 600 years old, it's remarkably well preserved. It's an object that shows unimaginable wealth, most commonly believed to have been commissioned by King Richard II of England, who reigned from 1377 to 1399. This diptych, painted on all interior and exterior panels, was intended to be a portable aid to prayer. On the interior left wing, we see a young Richard II kneeling in profile on an earthly setting, indicated by the ground beneath him and the trees in the background. He is being presented by St. John the Baptist, who announced the coming of Christ, holding the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world. Next to him stand two former kings and patron saints of England, St. Edward the Confessor, holding the ring he gave to a pilgrim who transpired to be the disguised John the Evangelist, and St. Edmund, holding the arrow of his martyrdom. Richard is looking up at the Virgin Mary and the infant Christ. They stand in a meadow surrounded by 11 angels, indicating that this is not of the earth, but the heavens. Christ is reaching towards Richard, his hand raised to bless him. Mary is holding out his right foot to foreshadow his earthly fate of being pierced at the cross. We can also see this in his golden halo. Looking closer, we can make out a crown of thorns, which was placed on his head leading up to his crucifixion. One of the angels on the left is holding a swallowtail white flag bearing a red cross. This is the flag of St. George, carried by all English soldiers going into battle. Near its top, if we look closely, we can see an orb. Within it, an island with trees and a white tower, surrounded by a now tarnished sea of silver. This image, along with the flag, is meant to represent England, which was said to be protected by the Virgin Mary. In fact, the country was commonly referred to as Mary's dowry. Both in Richard's robe and around his neck is a hart, or male red deer, which was his personal emblem. At the time, a monarch's court members would wear their ruler's emblem to show their political affiliations. Yet here, the hart is worn by the angels to show their heavenly support of his rule. This motif is continued as we look on the external panels. In the left panel's exterior, we see the animal lying on a bank of flowers, with a golden crown around its neck and antlers that have almost disappeared in the gold of the background. In the right panel's exterior, we can see a coat of arms of the Kingdom of England. Above it is a damaged image of a lion wearing a crown and standing on a red and white flag. These gilded panels don't stop at the subjects to convey humanity's connection to the divine. In my eyes, this is also present in the unknown artist's skills and choices. The decadent blue of the angels and the Virgin Mary's robes is done in ultramarine, a pigment mined from the lapis lazuli rocks found only in the Sadasang Valley in Afghanistan. Ultramarine's high price tag, costing more per ounce than gold, funnily enough, meant it was only used for subjects of significant importance. The gold, seemingly quiet in the background, has an intricate order of vines and patterns within it, punched using a hammer and a shaped tip to stamp in what we see here. We can also see it in Richard's crown, Christ's thorned halo, and the folds of the gold fabric he's wrapped in. No corners have been cut, no parts rushed. What I love most about this piece is not just the rich materials and the craftsmanship, but the subject. The gentleness of the angels and Mary as they quietly affirm this young king, who is depicted in a way to insinuate that he is supported by the enduring authority of the church. It's a compelling image of his political legitimacy, one that urges us even, centuries later, to support him. Two well-dressed men, most likely of important social or political roles, surrounded by their expensive objects. A simple double portrait, perhaps? Not quite. This piece is one of the most intellectually ambitious and visually rich pieces in art history, and the sense of curiosity starts almost immediately. It was completed in 1533 by Hans Holbein the Younger, during a time where the political situation in Western Europe was tumultuous. The Pope's refusal to annul King Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon led to him becoming a supreme head of a new national church of England. which would lead to a split in Christianity between the Lutherans and the Catholic Church. This context is not only important, but visually reflected time and time again in the many elements of this painting. So let's take a closer look. The Ambassadors is commissioned by this man, Jean de Dinteville, a young French ambassador sent to London by the King of France to keep an eye on Henry VIII. He was originally only expected to stay for Henry's marriage and coronation, but remained longer when Anne Boleyn became pregnant with Henry's heir, whose godfather was to be the King of France. And from the record of Jean's letters, we know that he was not happy being there. He was constantly sick and missed his life and home back in France. Jean stands at full length on the left, occupying the foreground with a broad stance. He is wearing a beautiful pink satin shirt and a black velvet coat with gold tags and white lynx fur. He holds a gold dagger with a sizable blue and gold tassel. The threads of the tassel, when viewed from up close, shine with immense detail. And this wasn't just because of the artist's skill, but also in his choice to use actual gold leaf atop glue to further highlight the beautiful detailing. The dagger is inscribed to indicate Jean's age. Here he is in his 29th year. To the right is Georges de Selve, Jean's friend and the French Bishop of Lavore. He had come to London most likely to bring a message from the King of France. He wears a fur-lined silk robe bearing a large pattern, which hints at the expense of the fabric. Here too, we have a clue to Georges' age, in his 23rd year, which is quite young for a bishop. In fact, young enough that he wasn't allowed to be properly ordained to wear the bishop's robes. Now you might be curious about the two shelves here, so let's dive in. The upper shelf holds instruments associated with time and geographical measurements according to celestial bodies. However, the dials are set to differing times, the quadrants are misaligned, and there are impractical shadows. Something is off. The lower shelf pivots more towards the terrestrial and the human realms. We see 6 items. A case of flutes here with one missing, a lute that's foreshortened or distorted in perspective to accurately depict its dimensions, but with one of its strings broken. Harmony is disrupted. 2 pages of a Lutheran German hymn book, one being Come Holy Ghost, and the other is Luther's rendering of the 10 Commandments, the latter being something that the Lutherans and the Catholics still had in common. We see a compass and a book of arithmetics that's propped open to a page with the title, Let There Be Division. And finally, a globe of the earth showing Europe upside down. They are all hinting at an idea of separation that exists at this moment in time in Europe, and more explicitly, Jean and Georges' anxiety towards it. The most puzzling and out-of-place element in this composition is in plain sight. Have you noticed it already? This distortion in the foreground. When seen from the right of the canvas, it's revealed to be a human skull, a common motif to place in portraits at the time, often in the background. But here it's front and center, yet partially hidden. This skull is doubled in Jean's cap tag, and if you look just behind him on the upper left corner, another reference to death is hidden, a silver crucifix seen from its side. This is a reference to the hope of salvation, something that united all Christians. In experiencing this life-size painting in all its rich detail, Holbein wanted us to experience the very real political tensions he was feeling, as well as a sense of powerlessness we all have against the ultimate equalizer, death. But perhaps there's hope in the salvation hiding just around the corner. A crowd gathers around a horse market in Paris. More than a dozen horses parade through the streets with their handlers. Inside the space is Rosa Bonheur, a pioneering artist known for her remarkable paintings of animals. The daughter of the artist Raymond Bonheur, Rosa was encouraged to pursue her interest in art at an early age. At the time, women artists were excluded from institutional training, particularly from anatomy classes with live models, which was ultimately the foundation of artists' education. So Bonheur, like her female contemporaries, was forced to look elsewhere. She studied animal anatomy on her own and deliberately entered spaces that were exclusive to men, like this horse market. To do so, she had to obtain legal documentation from the Paris police authorities that allowed her to dress as a man and avoid harassment. In many ways, Bonheur was a modern individual at a time when it was almost impossible to be one. She believed that neither her gender nor her personal life should have an impact on how her work was judged. Yet critics could not separate her from her talent, even making remarks such as, "This is so good, it could have almost been done by a man." Looking at this painting, the first thing you might notice is the movement. The horses surge forward with overwhelming energy. You might even be able to hear their neighs and the thunder of their hooves, smell the dirt kicked up beneath them, and feel the wind moving through their manes. This is where Bonheur's skill truly lies, to pull us directly into the painting, a rare accomplishment in the animal painting genre. The horses fill the composition. At the center right are massive dappled white Percheron horses with knotted tails, bred specifically for hauling weight. Their handlers strain to control them, their bodies pulled taut by the animal's strength. The meticulously painted muscles of the horses, the tension in the human figures, and the careful handling of light and shadow give this realist painting an almost photographic quality, elevating an ordinary street scene into high art. Within this dense, male-dominated crowd, one figure, a calmer, more self-assured one, stands out. This figure is believed to be a self-portrait of Bonheur herself. Positioned at the very center of the composition, she looks directly out at us with a firm, steady gaze. She is our calm anchor amongst the unsold horses, animals that convey freedom of movement and agency, rights that she, as a woman, did not have at the time. This sentiment and pose is mirrored in the white horse to her right. Like the animal fighting for its freedom, Bonheur, in just being who she is breaking the boundaries between public space and the private domestic realms traditionally assigned to women. Through her work and her life, she expanded the boundaries of what was possible not only for women artists, but for women. A peaceful English countryside, a river, a cart, a few figures going about their day. It almost feels too calm to demand more than a few seconds of our attention. But for its time, it was actually quite a daring piece. This painting by John Constable did well to not only break the rules of British art, but also ripple forward to shape artists and movements for decades after. Let's take a closer look. We can see a hay wain or hay cart and its two riders coming in from the bottom center, entering the river Stour. Next to it is a house which still stands today. On the center right, a man steps out of tall grass approaching a small boat. Further to the left, a woman washes laundry at the river's edge. Below her, a black and white dog is seemingly barking at the moving hay wain. The composition of the painting takes our eye from the bottom right, where Constable signs his name and dates the work, to the left, following the curve of the river toward the mill, then upward into the sky as the finale. In the distance, we can see farmers holding scythes and pitchforks, piling up hay onto a second cart, almost one with the natural landscape around them. The color palette resembles the nature we all know and love in its tonal range, saturation, and value. At the time, landscape painters favored browner tones to resemble the works of classical masters whose pigments had faded over centuries. Constable's use of such a bright green palette strayed from this tradition, and he didn't stop there. He punctuated his works with even brighter shades, such as the complementary red of the horse's harness, the white of the dog's fur, and even the small white specks flicked onto leaves, catching the sunlight for just a second. This work almost seems impressionist. The visible brushstrokes, the emphasis on light, the palette knife scraping through water. But it was done decades before the movement peaked its head. Landscape paintings were expected to hide the artist's hand and hence brushstrokes. But Constable did not want to leave himself out of such a personal piece. He loved the nature he was raised in, and he expressed it with pride. He was born in Suffolk County in the east of England and always returned to his home either physically or through his artwork. He once said, "The sound of water escaping from mill dams, willows, old rotten planks, slimy posts, and brickwork. I love such things. As long as I do paint, I shall never cease to paint such places. They have always been my delight. Even though this painting has the power to place us directly into this moment in time, it wasn't actually done on location. Constable had produced studies of the scene en plein air for years, but the final work itself was created in his studio in London. When it was exhibited at the Royal Academy of Arts in England, the reception was not very warm. However, it earned wider recognition in France, where the Louvre's curator at the time even called Constable the messiah of landscape painting. The Wain went on to influence the Barbizon school, and later the Impressionists, encouraging them in their pursuit of painting honest and subjective images of nature. When you step back into the pulse of London, the air might feel different. Within these walls, 7 centuries of color, light, and shadow remind us that while the hands that held the brushes are long gone, the questions they asked remain, the stories they told still familiar. If you ever want to dive into the ideas and art history rabbit holes that don't quite fit the shape of a YouTube video, head over to my Substack, link in the description, for weekly posts.